Hi everybody, great to see so many friendly faces around. I know that we have a lot of people who come back every month, which is lovely. This is, I think, our 11th month running now. I think we started in March last year, so coming up to our 1 year anniversary. But really appreciate all the returning faces, and also great to see so many new ones as well. Thanks for joining us. If this is your first time, I'm Jenny Smith and I'm the chair of the Cloud Cafe. Obviously, there's a whole load of work and people that go on behind the scenes, so big shout out to Dagan and Elizabeth and Lynn and all the rest of the team who pull these things together. It's really turned into a really nice community to be part of, and we hope that you guys enjoy coming as well. So I'll just give it a couple more minutes for people to join. I think we had almost 100 people sign up again, so we'll be packed out as usual. If we can ever see each other in real life again, we're never going to be able to find a venue big enough for everyone. So let's we'll have to live stream it from the real cafe.
100 people.
Do you have a sense of what proportion of people that come are from Stroud?
Well, if we looked at the Action Network, then we definitely could get a sort of breakdown of where people are coming from. I know that we have quite a lot of people from Stroud and from sort of surrounding Green parties, so Gloucester Green Party and the Cotswolds and Tewkesbury and places like that. But obviously, dependent on the subject content, we bring in people from all over the place. So the one in January, we actually broke our 100-person limit, and we had people trying to get in who couldn't actually get in because obviously we had Nicola Kutcher, who's doing the Riverside documentary with George Monbiot, and she obviously brought in a big crowd with her, as well as all the other people. So we had people joining from Ilkley because we had speakers from up there, and some from London as well. So yeah, all over the place at the minute.
Great.
I'm sure you will have brought a big crowd from Bristol as well this time, Carla.
Oh, I don't know. I think the people in Bristol are tired of hearing me speak by now.
We've got Exeter, Cheltenham and Exeter tonight.
Yeah, we had a few people. Oh, there we go. Look, Cheltenham, Exeter, fantastic. Let us know where you are.
Oh, do you want me to get my headphones?
Yeah, if that's maybe all right. I guess maybe for the
give me 2 minutes.
Sorry.
I'll also get mine just to maximise audio quality in that case.
Okay, that's great. Thanks, guys. Hi, Lynn. Hi, everybody. Okay, we're at 32. So when we've got our speakers back in the room, we will crack on.
Mine says 50, Jenny.
50
participants.
Oh yeah, we're climbing 53 now. So we had 95 sign up, but conversion rate usually isn't 100%. So and some people drop in as we go. Oh, Tewkesbury. Hi guys. Okay, so for everybody that's just joining, welcome to the Cloud Cafe February edition. Today we have 3 fantastic speakers and an all-female lineup, which is fantastic to see. So the way that the sessions run is that we have our 3 speakers who will give a short 10-minute presentation. As they go, please feel free to drop questions into the chat so that we can ask them at the end of the session. where we have a Q&A and discussion period where we really encourage attendees to unmute, turn their cameras on and ask questions to the panel. That is your time to get the information that you need. So today we have got 3 fantastic speakers with us, and we really appreciate them taking the time out to give to the session. And the title of our February Cloud Cafe is COPportunity Knocks. So as I'm sure you're all aware, COP26 is supposed to be coming up in November 21, fingers crossed, COVID permitting. We've already had one delay to it, but I think that fingers crossed it'll be hosted in Glasgow this year. So I guess as we emerge from the COVID crisis, we as Greens, I'm sure, are all aware that we've got the bigger, longer looming crisis right behind it, which is the climate crisis. So today we'll be talking about climate action, climate justice. What does it look like in a post-COVID world? What's the role of Parliament? Some practical and hopefully quite radical ideas and policies that we can implement across the board in order to reach the climate targets that we've set for ourselves. And how can we also make street protest and non-violent direct action effective and successful as we you know, approach and tackle the climate crisis? So who are our speakers? We'll be kicking off with Sarah Lunnon. So Sarah in a previous life was a historic building surveyor and a local authority councillor for the Green Party. She's represented both at district and county level. She's also coordinator for the Extinction Rebellion's political circle, and she's now working very hard with the CEE Bill Alliance, lobbying to change the law to protect our futures. She apparently is notoriously bad at emails, and we feel very privileged that we've managed to get this bio from her. So I'll let you kick off, Sarah, and your 10 minutes starts now. Thanks for joining everybody. Oh, and just so that we can see our speakers a little bit better, if everyone turns their cameras off now, that would be great. And just to remind everyone that the session is now being recorded. So use the chat for any questions, and we will make sure that there's enough time for discussion at the end. Okay, thanks, Sarah.
Okay, thanks very much. And I've had a little look at who else is on this call, and there's some other notorious emailers as well, so then maybe they can make themselves known. So yeah, at the moment I'm working with the CEE Bill Alliance, so I've stepped away from the Extinction Rebellion, which was an amazing 2 years that I spent with that movement and as part of the political circle. And I am now a convicted criminal, which is quite a surprise. So I have actually lost my previous good character. But I'll come on to non-violent direct action and what I think we can do to make it successful. I'd just like to introduce the Climate and Ecological Emergency Bill. It was actually tabled as the Climate and Ecology Bill, and it seeks to use the levers of government power that already exist to protect the future of life on Earth. So it seeks to be transformational, but it's not revolutionary. If law, it would require communication about the current precarious situation, accepting where we are, and then mobilising for the result which is needed. So currently, I think the way that the climate and ecological crisis is talked about is we might talk about the symptoms, for example, flooding, or the fact that our wheat harvest, well, our harvest, the UK harvest, is down by 16%, or we might talk about the wildfires in Australia, we might talk about the melting ice caps. All of that stuff is talked about quite often on the BBC without reference to what's driving it. So it's as if we were talking about the hospitals being full without talking about COVID. So that's at the moment mostly, I think, how the current crisis, environmental crisis, is talked about. We talk about the symptoms, but we don't reference the causes. And so the bill would actually require that communication to start happening. Given the radical nature of the changes that would be required because of the bill, it requires the integral involvement of the public. so that it legitimises the actions required, and it does that via use of a citizens' assembly. And so in many ways the bill seeks to point out what's happening, why the actions are needed, and then provides a route for those changes to happen and to be legitimised. The main points of the bill are that the Prime Minister declares a climate and ecological emergency, so that the UK sets a legal target, a budget to achieve its fair share of CO2 reductions to ensure that global temperature does not rise above 1.5 degrees. And I might come back to that particular figure. And that our CO2 accounting includes those emissions we import via manufacturing goods, and we count aviation and shipping. That the UK restores and regenerates ecosystems and biodiversity, which will optimise carbon sink capacity, and that a citizens' assembly is set up, working with the government and its recommendations to form part of a strategy to ensure the UK achieves its objectives. The bill's been drawn up with input from respected academics, from earth sciences, ecology and democratic studies. So the profs have provided the academic gravitas. The establishment push will be provided, hopefully, by the people who are signing up towards the bills, the allies. We've got professors of structural engineering, for example, signing up. We've got the Ecology Building Society, people from banking, energy companies. We've got Ecotricity and Scottish Power signing up to support the bill. And the public mandate will be delivered by the grassroots alliances that are currently forming and lobbying their MPs to support the bill. So that's a very brief and very quick overview of the bill. The specific questions, there were 4 questions that were posed to us to answer. And I'm not sure how much time I've got left. I didn't really look at when I started, but I'll attempt to answer them and see how far I get. How can we make sure that we see both climate action and climate justice in 2021? So I think there's some really interesting people writing about this at the moment. And one of the most interesting people is Jason Hickel and his Less is More book. And he lays out really clearly, I think, and very understandably, how our current economic system is based on a designed scarcity. So the removal of communal assets, which are then sold back to us. And he details how, in acting to decarbonise and repair our planet, we can also provide plenty for all. And so George Monbiot also talks about this, the idea of public wealth and private scarcity. And counterintuitively, I think this would also free us, the majority of us, from David Graeber's bullshit jobs. If we had to buy less, if we had actually more assets, then we would actually bring independence and freedom back into our lives. So Less is More is the title of his book, and I think it's brilliant. And it does lay out why you can't have one. You're not going to have climate justice without corresponding social justice. We need both. And we saw in France what happened when you try and do one without the other, with the Gilets jaunes taken to the streets. And it's also why the Citizens' Assembly is one of the main planks of the bill. So there's an actual route for the concerns of everyday ordinary people to be taken into account when policy is being designed. The role of Parliament, well, for the last 30 years, Parliament has failed to act. However, it does still control the levers of power. So there is still a role of Parliament. It does still make policy. It is still the most powerful organisation in this country. And we've seen in the last year just how radical Parliament can be if it has the support of the people and the requirement to act. So we've seen how radical it can be, and so now we need to push Parliament to be that radical on the climate and ecological emergency, because we are now living through, those actions, and we're living through an emergency response. And with the G7, with COP26, there is also the ability for our government right now to have a world platform. So whatever we push and demand of our government, and however far it moves, we also have that ability to take those other nations with us, to display what we are doing. what are the radical but practical policies we need to push for? So I'd say here the only practical policies are the ones that decarbonise and repair our ecosystems. Nothing else is practical. So every action that governments take, and in a way that we need to take in our ordinary lives, have to be assessed through what has the greatest carbon impact and the most beneficial impact on the biomass. Everything else is impractical and is destroying our common home. And also it's immoral because the actions we take can't be undone. The implications are irreversible. Extreme weather, extinction, we cannot undo these things. And so that moral factor, how do we factor in the rights and needs of future generations, we also have to consider in our policies, and I think in also our own actions. And finally, how can we make street protest and non-violent direct action effective? Well, one thing I've done in looking at this is, after the actions of Extinction Rebellion, the school strikes, Black Lives Matter, is a recognition that a political space has been opened up. And the Climate and Ecological Emergency Bill seeks to move into that space, because we have to have the answers ready for when the non-violent direct action works, for when government does turn around and say, right, what is it you need me to do? We have to have already occupied that space. And Naomi Klein has talked to this about having those policies on the shelf that are ready to be picked up and used. And so that's part of the work that I've been doing with the CEE bill. And I'm going to stop there. I could talk a lot about non-violent direct action. And hopefully we'll come back to it. I think I might just add, though, on an individual level, in terms of taking it, I think you have to do it from a position of service and a recognition in wanting to be a good ancestor to those future generations that are going to come. And I think that's what drives and has driven a lot of the recent action that we've seen on the streets.
Absolutely. Okay, thanks, Sarah. Thanks for kicking us off. That was a really good insight into the CEE bill, which I think you're right, you know, transformative, not revolutionary, but I think we have to take these small steps if we want to eventually change the system. And, you know, key points definitely covering the Prime Minister's lack of declaring a climate emergency, which I know takes us perfectly into our next speaker. So let me introduce Carla. Carla's a Green Party councillor in Bristol, and in 2018 she proposed the first climate emergency motion in Europe, committing Bristol to a carbon neutral by 2030, which started a wave across the country. Before entering politics, Carla worked as an engineer in renewable energy industry, specialising in offshore and onshore wind technology. She's represented the Green Party in both parliamentary and European elections. So Carla is going to be our next speaker, having 10 minutes on the clock. So remember, everybody, if you've got questions for Sarah, pop them into the chat, and likewise Carla, as she's running through her presentation, please feel free. Dagan, can we make sure that Carla can share a screen?
Well remembered.
Okay, thanks. There you go, Carla.
Thank you. Jenny, could I ask you to give me a shout at 8 minutes, just so I know that I've got 2 minutes left?
I'll give you a wave, no problem.
Perfect.
I'm not too strict anyway, by the way.
All right. So I've been asked to start off by introducing you, if you're not already acquainted, with the Green Party's 10-point climate plan. So we published this in December, and it's intended to be a counterpoint to the government's severely underwhelming plan of the same name. The government, as you're all aware, I'm sure, has so far failed to meet any of its targets to reach net zero even by 2050, a target which in itself we think is not enough. Their 10-point plan would only get halfway to meeting its own interim targets. And even worse, in many areas, they're going in the wrong direction. We should, for example, be looking to swiftly reduce the amount of travel that is necessary by car, and yet the government is going ahead with a £27 billion road building project. Meanwhile, thousands of people across the country are living in fuel poverty this winter and so unable to heat their homes. That shouldn't be happening. And so the Green Party's alternative 10-point plan does more than just tackle climate change. It would also tackle poverty by insulating homes, providing a universal basic income, and so on. The plan is made up of existing Green Party policies, but just repackaged into a cohesive, simple, accessible set of 10 priorities. So I'm going to attempt to share my screen now, and I'll show you a little bit of it. Oh, come on. Just a moment. Okay, should be just coming up now. So, apologies if that's just made everything jump around my screen. I won't sit here and read it all to you. I think I just saw that someone had dropped a link in the chat. If not, I'll do it in a minute. And many of the items in it will be far from new concepts to you anyway, with things like renewable energy, housing insulation, sustainable transport, etc. So I'll just draw out a couple of the less commonly discussed policies in here that I think are interesting. A carbon tax is number one in this plan. It's a policy we've had for a while, but I think perhaps we haven't talked about it as much as we should. And part of the reason is that I think it can be quite complicated to explain it in the often quite unfairly short sound bites that we get in the news. And a common criticism of it is that it would drive up the cost of living for families. But actually, there's a really good answer to that I think it's useful for us all to get familiar with. The first part of it is to acknowledge that, yes, carbon taxes will drive up the cost of some petrol, for example. There's no denying it. But the way the carbon tax would work is that those rates would start low, giving people time to change their behaviour. So by the time the higher tax rates kick in, they'll have had time to adjust and they won't be reliant on these items. The second part of the answer is that the cost increases from the carbon taxes will be more than offset for families by the universal basic income, with every individual receiving at least £89 a week unconditionally. Housing and public transport would also be cheaper to access under these proposals, and public services better funded. So on balance, people would have more money in their pockets than now. Another of the policies I just want to draw out here quickly is electrifying industry. Now, we recognise, of course, that a significant chunk of carbon emissions currently comes from industrial processes. Take steel production, for example, which uses blast furnaces fed with coal and iron ore. And while lower carbon alternatives do exist, electric arc furnaces being probably the most promising, they're currently a tiny proportion of the total steel industry in the UK. So that's what needs to change. And with a combination of capital investment plus keeping more of the UK's own scrap steel in the country to be reused, because we currently export almost all of it and let other people deal with it, the UK could be self-sufficient in lower carbon steel. And in fact, shifting that industry to the combination of recycling scrap metal in renewable powered electric arc furnaces alone, that would reduce the emissions from the steel industry by up to 75%. I know this because some very clever people have put together a policy that is going to Green Party conference next month. And I encourage you all to vote for it if you're Green Party members. The 10-point plan also proposes a framework for how we would structure a government policy response to this. Here it is on the right-hand side here. So we've put forward that to drive change, we need 5-year plans focusing on actual emissions reductions every year. That because of the UK's historic emissions, we have a particular moral and scientific case for going as fast as possible and not just, meeting the requirements bare minimums. And importantly, as Sarah said, there must be no exceptions. Every sector must play its part. And no fancy accounting or offsets either, which there's a worrying amount of at the moment. Okay, I will stop screen sharing now. That's quite enough of that. Let's move you all back around on my screen. There we go. Now, I think this document could be really useful for Green Party campaigning in the run-up to COP. It didn't actually make that big of a splash when we put it out in December, but I think we can still get some good mileage out of it. But we won't be the only organisation lobbying around COP, of course. So it might be hard to have our voice heard, and realistically, we may not be able to change the outcome of it as much as we want. But I think that as Greens, we should lean into our difference. We aren't a lobbying or a direct action organisation primarily, but a political party. And my feel is that one of the things that the Green Party is really good at is moving the Overton window in the direction of radical policies by presenting them as achievable, normal and sensible. I won't list them, but you'll all be familiar with the many policies that we've championed, and everyone has ridiculed us right up until the point where they adopted our policies. I had this chat with a couple of people who are working on the Green Party's approach to COP26, and indeed they confirmed that that is pretty much the approach that the Green Party will be taking. So we'll be talking about climate justice, that sense of international justice, and in fact long overdue reparations between the developed white majority former imperial nations and the global South nations from which the British Empire and others took resources. Thank you. The Green Party's helped lead on the concept of reparations in the UK. Scott Ainsley in Lambeth and my colleague Cleo Lake in Bristol have both proposed reparations motions to their councils. And so I think the Greens have something different and useful to say here about the concept of reparations as part of climate justice. Green Party's also going to be talking about carbon tax around COP, which I think is going to be helpful. And we'll also be leveraging the fact that we're the only truly international party. I learned an amazing statistic the other day. Globally, there are 400 Green Party members in national legislatures in different countries and 13 government ministers. Isn't that amazing? We set examples all over the world by working together with others. And, you know, unlike a lot of the other parties who really are stuck in the concept of nationhood, I think that the Global Greens movement allows us to learn from what our colleagues are doing in other countries and quickly apply them in our own. And that on its own is a good example that we could set for other nations and representatives at COP. I was going to attempt to answer the questions that were posed in the preamble of the event, but I'm aware that I'm running out of time. So I might save that and anticipate that somebody's going to ask some of them anyway.
Okay, thanks, Carla. Thanks for running us through the action plan and showing us a little bit of it. You know, I think you're right about it's good to bring down these huge policies that we've always championed and represent them in bite-sized chunks. I think you're also right about that, you know, move from a party of influence to a party of power, and yet even though we're in power, we continue to influence. I think that that's always going to be a part of what Greens do. So thank you so much for that. And I will take us and introduce our next speaker, who is Laura Baldwin, who was a science scholar at college and university and went on to become an Olympic sailor and coach. She now takes on a much more difficult role of being the mother of a 7-year-old and is been volunteering for XR, leading local community projects such as tree planting, eco fairs, People's Assembly, and going around and talking to different groups, for example, schools. She's currently engaged in the Ocean Rebellion, which is a legal case against the shipping industry, works for Champions for Earth, the World Olympians, and is co-founder of Greens Can, which is what she will be speaking to us this evening about. And as well as all of that, is taking on the most challenging role, which I'm sure a lot of you are as well, which is homeschooling and trying to keep a child entertained during lockdown. So Laura, welcome. Hopefully you can unmute yourself, and thank you for joining us this evening. Your 10 minutes starts now.
Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity this evening to input into what could potentially have a pivotal impact at this absolutely critical time in the history of humanity. You know, the future is kind of hinging somewhat on the outcomes of this COP26. Today is the 10th of February, 2021. We're currently at 415 parts per million of atmospheric carbon dioxide on a planet that is 1.2 degrees, heading for 3 to 5 degrees by the end of this century. You know, the scientists and the scholars, they warn that will likely lead to societal collapse and the extinction of 1 million species. You know, these dates for carbon neutrality are giving us a false sense of time. You know, it's not 2050, it's not 2030, it's this year and next. It's how we come out of the COVID crisis that is going to shape the next decade, century, and beyond. You know, the Green Party are the trusted party when it comes to the environment, and we really need to play on that superpower this year. You know, continuing the same old campaigning is almost guaranteed to fail. You know, we need to do something different. We need fundamental change, and it needs to happen fast. Like, we need an unprecedented uprising. We need to push for much stronger, much faster, genuinely green solutions from this government now. The Green Party's time is now. It's this year. Everything that they've been working on for years, everything needs to climax in this year to really push ourselves forward and get heard and noticed. So how does the Green Party use its platform to propel the people of this country to take action? And how does it influence the rest of the world without yet holding the key to number 10? So Extinction Rebellion has been the most influential and powerful movement in sounding the alarm on the climate and ecological emergency. They've had huge success in that, shifted the Overton window tremendously, and will continue to have a really important role to play. But our feeling is that the climate and ecological emergency needs new respected voices to stand up and be heard, and to take on the dialogue and to sell the solutions. So Extinction Rebellion's success was based on the fact they engaged in non-violent direct action, NVDA. They caused a disturbance, it created attraction, and they got invited to engage in dialogue with the media, the government, and corporates and councils. The Green Party, interestingly, has as its philosophical basis that explicitly says that it should not only rely on the ballot box, that where necessary, the Green Party should engage in non-violent direct action. Breaking the rules for a good cause has long been a noble tradition. You know, NVDA has been successful many times in the past, and notably the success of Gandhi with the Indian rebellion against the British rule. Then we had Rosa Parks, who sparked the civil rights movement. Martin Luther King, who forced changes to racially discriminating laws, and the suffragettes, who got the women the vote. So this year, there's Burning Pink out there that are aiming to fill the prisons. We've got XR aiming to flood the jails and the courtrooms. And then we could have Greens Can, you know, really sort of showing the solutions, getting the mass participation, perhaps through not advocating for arrest for the main part, to be more inclusive, but then have our leaders step forward and sacrifice themselves where necessary to strengthen the cause. If anyone wants to get involved with Greens Can and shape it really at its beginning, please do, to show what this could look like. So Greens Can was born in the mind of Professor Rupert Reed, who proposes that the Green Party engage in radical truth-telling, saying honestly that the aim of the Green Party to stave off the climate and ecological catastrophe through the electoral route has failed. The politics in general has failed to protect us. All international climate conferences to date have failed. And that the COP26, our last best chance, is also likely to fail. No, sorry, Rupert would say is going to fail. And in saying this, it will attract media attention and it'll open the dialogue for us to be able to push our solutions and to emphasize the importance of decarbonising at speed. We need a war-style mobilisation to overcome this, and we need to use such strong language to get attention. Being authentic and honest will gain public respect. And paradoxically, Rupert continues that one way we might unleash the Green Party with a new power at the ballot box is by saying that the ballot box is no longer enough. If we back up such new realism with new deepened willingness to engage in intelligent, well thought through, targeted NVDA that makes sense, then the message will have extra credibility. We'll be showing by our deeds that we mean what we say, and that this could be really powerful. So co-founder Councillor Alison Teal is a great example of how NVDA can be successful at a local level. Her willingness to get arrested and being threatened with imprisonment to protect the trees that her council wanted to cut down saw her gain re-election with huge local support. And I think 4 other Greens gained a seat through that action. And the trees were saved too. Now, this government is gifting us plenty of local issues to contend, such as objecting to new oil wells, waste incinerators, substandard buildings that they're trying to put on protected green sites, expanding airport runways and roads, legalizing bee-killing pesticides, even a new coal mine. I mean, you can make this stuff up. And then there's HS2, which has seen 4 teenagers so afraid and so aware of the climate and ecological emergency that they've been willing, and 2 still are, risking their lives being tunneled under Euston Gardens currently to simply sound the alarm. We adults owe it to the kids to at least say it how it is, to tell the people the truth whilst there's still a chance to make significant, positive, effective change. We need to at least be able to have a clear conscience when we look into our children's eyes and say that we honestly tried everything. Many of the youths, they know the scientific facts, but what is causing them the eco-anxiety suffering is the inaction of this government and the fear of what will be, suffering, catastrophic climate impacts and ecological collapse. Today's youths have sacrificed tremendously in the last 12 months to keep the older members of our families alive, and it's time that we made equal sacrifices to keep them alive. And the COVID crisis has taught us the power of telling the truth. Like, when people understood the causes and consequences, they were willing to make tremendous sacrifices. And it also taught us that this government is not going to save us. As co-founder Sharat Ali says, we need to move beyond what is politically possible to deliver what is scientifically necessary. We need to empower and motivate people to consent and participate in making the necessary changes. We need to focus on what we're going to gain, we need to focus local, improving the quality of lives, creating happy, healthy, fulfilling communities that our children can thrive in for generations to come. Yes, learning the truth is going to cause people shock, feelings of grief and anger, but they need to experience these emotions in order to consent to making the necessary changes. We need to transfer that emotional energy into positive action. And by including people in the decision-making processes, locally by using people assemblies, and nationally by using citizens' assemblies, we can really help to get people to consent to these changes by being part of the process. And it will also strengthen politics, enabling those difficult decisions to be made without politicians having to shoulder any of the blame. It's perfect, really, isn't it? Let's start now, during lockdown, by doing the truth. Greta has shown the power of words, mobilising millions of school children to strike for climate. We need to find our courage to step outside of our comfort zones and follow a radically honest path. Let's support Greens locally in actions. Let's tell the truth locally. Let's mobilise our communities to engage in emergency food growing, water capture, rewilding, mass floods, getting together and creating renewable energy co-ops. You know, make these changes that are necessary happen. Don't just wait for the government to deliver it to us. And we need to get that energy and urgency that comes with XR and get it to sort of really push and supercharge the transition movement to something that can create effective change. And let's plan the mother of all uprisings once it's COVID safe to do so. Like, let's call upon the 50,000 members and all their cross-party friends, the sea of green hitting Westminster with our placards showcasing the solutions. Also a massive banner probably saying we're running out of time, and that really powerful countdown clock of the carbon budget to the 1.5 degrees. Yeah, let's booster this Green Britain revolution that's now launching through the Express and the Sun, because together we can. And I just really quickly like to say, I'm sorry, I know I'm running over, a really huge thank you to those that have already expressed support for Greens Can, namely Molly Scott-Cato, Sarah Lunnon, Zoe Hatch, Jonathan Porritt and Britta Goodman. Please do get involved. It's brand new, you can shape it and create it. We've got a couple of trainings coming up in People's Assembly Facilitation and MBDA. I'll put the details in the chat. And helping with fundraising for actions, but also we're thinking that why not try and fundraise for resilience and regeneration of local communities to get the money to make happen what we need to. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Laura. And yes, definitely include any information that you want to share with our delegates in the chat. I'm sure everybody is feeling totally inspired after all of those fantastic presentations. I think you're right. Sorry, I mean, really good points, Laura, that you've made around, you know, we can't just rely on the ballot box, non-violent direct action. People power is also absolutely necessary if we're going to spark a green revolution and make the changes that need to happen in order to meet or exceed the targets that we've made, because I'm sure the majority of our government targets currently are way below what's necessary. So yes, okay, thank you so much. We've actually had quite a few questions now in the chat, so I'm going to invite John and Sue first of all to ask your question if you'd like to unmute. To the speakers, just give me a hand up if you would like to come in on this, and I will pull you in first. Thanks, John and Sue.
Right, I think you've probably chosen my question because it's really emphasising the title COPportunity. My question is, what defines the success of COP26? And I'm a bit concerned because obviously lots of different people have different ideas about what will be the success. And I think the Green Party ought to have a view on that. I've already had one answer from Simon Pickering, who sees it in a very straight, simple matter of reduction in emissions. But actually that isn't, although that might be one of the aims, it's really how we get that reduction, which to me defines the success of COP26.
Thanks, John. Okay, so any of our speakers like to come in on that? Sarah?
So, I think Laura made a really good point in that every single international body that's met since 1990, the IPCC and the IPBES, the biodiversity COP, have failed. And they failed because we are not where we need to be. So every year since 1990, and even I think last year, our carbon emissions increased. They've only ever gone one way. And up until very recently, the rate of increase was increasing. So it wasn't just getting worse, it was getting worse faster every single year. And also COPs, the COPs are they're profoundly problematic in that they end up being political because they have to reach a political consensus on the way to go forward. And so they always end up being watered down. And we can see that in the way that nets have been completely taken up as a get out of jail card. So the 1.5 budget is so small, it's so minuscule that there is no way you could look at that budget and carry on with an economy, grow it with economic growth. You just can't do it. There's no way. And the only way you can keep business as usual going is by grasping these unicorns of negative emission technologies, which don't exist at scale. And the ones that do exist, they're energy intensive. So they need more energy to pull the carbon out of the energy that's being produced. So it's a kind of vicious circle all on its own. So the nets are deeply problematic. The need for consensus drives down the scientific, well, not the scientific consensus, but it drives down the message. It makes it always an easier message for us to accept. So what would be a successful COP? Coming back to the question, one that acknowledged just what a terrible situation we are in. One that acknowledged that you cannot use non-existent technologies. We cannot rely on them to carry on business as usual. And that what they are doing, they are a high stakes gamble with our children's future. The idea that they are going to happen. So we have to accept that we need to move away from economic growth and that we have to decarbonise rapidly, and that is going to have a huge impact on the way that we live our lives. So it comes back to what Laura was saying about truth telling. And for me, I can see that would be the only, that would be a successful COP. Oh, and there's loads of other things as well I could go into on, like international equity, the fact that, you know, we use shed loads of carbon, so reducing by 40-50% and expecting everybody else to do so equally is deeply unfair. So it might be equal, but it's not equitable. So there's a huge piece of work to do around our government's application of equity and what they think is fair.
Thanks, Sarah. Carla, Laura, would you like to comment on that? If not, I can move to another question.
I think Sarah said most of what I would have said. I really agree, especially with the negative emissions technology. In fact, yeah, I'll just add as an example, like in Bristol, when we're thinking about how Bristol might be able to get to carbon neutral by 2030, we've realised that we can't even, like the Labour mayor here keeps talking about having an underground mass transit system. And I'd love to have a better mass transit system in Bristol, but an underground would take more than 10 years to build. So there's no point considering that. We have to think about things that we can bring in the next few years. So it's that problem, but on a global scale, and we really need to see all the solutions with existing technology and a real step change of ambition and truth telling.
Absolutely. Okay, thanks. Everyone just put your hands up if you want to come in. If not, I'll just move on to the next question because there's quite a few to get through. Gemma Waters, would you like to unmute and ask your question? Bristol got Gemma. Oh yeah, I can see her there.
Hiya.
Hi Gemma, thanks.
Hiya. Yeah, I was just thinking about education in this because obviously a lot of, I know we're talking about action right now, but I still think surely education and the education system that I work within myself just seems so flawed in terms of preparing young people and educating them about the reality of the world we live in right now. So I was just interested if the speakers had a view on that in terms of, you know, a way forward, basically. Thanks.
Thanks, Gemma. Laura, do you want to start on that one?
Yeah, so not specifically Green Party, but Greens Can. That is an area that we are keen to look at. I've done quite a lot of school talks and had incredible results. It's called From Anxiety to Empowerment, and managed to get children who haven't spoken for 2 years to stand up in front of their peers and deliver their eco-friendly Christmas ideas and find their voice. The children that usually are completely disengaged, needing their TA to help them with every word, completely creating their own work independently. It's a topic that children really engage in, and they understand, they get it, and they're not so afraid of the climate and ecological emergency and the facts. They can really sort of accept what is. What frightens them is seeing that the government isn't acting, hearing that the government is not acting on this. So it's an area that definitely needs addressing. I don't know what the Green Party specifically are doing about it, so I'll pass on to somebody else.
Yeah, I can pick it up quickly. So one of the big demands of the youth strike campaign was to teach the future. So an education system, exactly as you're saying, that needs to be reformed to teach young people about the urgency and the severity and the scientific basis of the climate crisis and the solutions. And that's something that especially the youth strikers in Bristol were very loud about, and the Green Party responded by basically agreeing to like pledging their request in the run up to the last general election. And aside from that, I think that there is a lot that we can do now by going into schools and things like that. I've been asked to speak to a number of groups of young people that are at the beginning of their climate journeys in Bristol and want to make change but don't know how to go about it. And while yes, we do need to act urgently, and we can't wait for these people to, you know, to learn their craft, if you like, we still need them, because regardless of how quickly we get there, we're going to have to keep powering on through past it, and we need new people coming in all the time and fresh ideas.
Okay, great. Sarah, any comments on education?
Yes, I think we should educate everybody over the age of 30, and particularly people who are white and male over the age of 55, because they're the people who are basically the most powerful in the country at the moment, and they're the ones who can make the change happen. So of course we need resilient, creative, thoughtful, practical children. However, there's not very much they can do. I mean, but the people who can do the stuff, those are the people we need to go after.
Absolutely. It's not about educating the next generation anymore. It's about what we can do now, I guess. Also, obviously, educating the next generation at the same time. But like you say, targeting those that are in power right now. Okay, I'm going to ask, I think it's Penny from Stroud rather than Penny Stroud. But Penny, if you want to unmute and ask your question.
Yeah. My question is, from my reading, I gathered one of the biggest problems with all the COPs has been that the nationally determined contributions are unenforceable. So what happens all the time is that countries make these vast promises and they just break them immediately. And there's no way of enforcing them. So shouldn't the COPs be aiming to make the NDCs legally enforceable? Surely the biggest problem is that countries make all those huge promises and they can't be held to account when they break them.
I'd just say yes, absolutely.
Yeah, go Carla.
Well, mine's quick, so there'll be time for you too. I'm on quite a steep learning curve about COP myself. I've not been to one previously, so what I say may not be right, and do correct me. But I've been told, it's been put to me that there hasn't been a legally binding international treaty since the WTO came into being, because they effectively, the World Trade Organization, they effectively stymied the ability for nations to agree legally enforceable targets, because they have a bearing on trade inevitably, and that is the hurdle that needs to be overcome somehow. don't have the answer for how, but that's how I've understood to be the reason why we don't have these legally binding targets at the moment.
Thanks, Sarah.
I think there's something here about if we actually start counting embedded emissions rather than territorial emissions. So if we can start doing that and people understand why you need to count embedded emissions, you can actually then start influencing your supply chains, because at the moment we've basically exported our carbon emissions along with our manufacturing. So if you're going to count your embedded emissions and you've got a public who are absolutely furious that you're not doing enough work, one way that you can, if you then bring manufacturing back within your territory, you can then start reducing your embedded emissions and reducing your manufacturing emissions, because you can control the source of them. And so through the trade, you can then start impacting on those international supply lines. And actually, interestingly, this is something that the Conservatives are beginning to look at, because they recognise that as they start driving, it's embarrassing not counting embedded emissions, but also by not counting them, you are actually enabling those high carbon economies to carry on producing. You're not getting any climate benefit from it, and you are also continuing that offshoring process of your manufacturing. So they are beginning to take a very close look at embedded emissions. And I think with all the difficulties of enforcing legal agreements between different countries, this is something that we need to move on with a kind of unity and agreement rather than enforcement, because if we start trying to enforce this via international law, it's, well, yeah, I don't know, I'm probably with Carla on it, I don't know enough about it, but I think trade, and that the one possible positive of Brexit is that we can actually start looking at what we do with our trade and how we count those embedded emissions.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, everyone. So I've just been scrolling rapidly through the chat because I think I've missed some. So Chris Miller, if you want to come in and ask your 752 question around Labour, but I think it probably expands beyond Labour to other parties as well. Chris, are you there?
Yes, I am here. Thanks. Well, I suppose I was just typing another question, really, which is that we all know what the problem is, and we believe we're in the midst of a global emergency. But unfortunately, at the moment, an insufficient number of people accept that there is an emergency, or alternatively, they don't accept the solutions to the problem. So, although we can put forward a whole variety of problems, I was wondering really whether solutions rather. I was wondering whether anybody on the panel has any ideas, concrete ideas, as to how we resolve that sort of dilemma that we have. We know the problem, but other people, insufficient number of people, really don't go along with that, with our thinking on it. And until we can kind of crack that, until we can bring people on board, we're not going to go very far. We're not going to move forward very quickly. So we can say, yes, we have a solution, people must change, but saying that doesn't actually make that happen. And it does seem to me that there's insufficient thinking about how we genuinely take people with us.
Thanks, Chris. Carla, nice, thanks.
Yeah, I can have a go at that. Actually, the research is starting to show that the general population are turning a corner on this now. I think that this is a genuine area of hope. Admittedly, a lot of my data is from Bristol, which I know isn't representative, but I have seen some UK data as well. Can't remember the name of it, but when I'm done talking, I'm going to find a link to the 2 reports I'm thinking of and drop them in the chat. One of them was surveying people in Bristol, and it was a representative sample of people from all over Bristol, and it showed that there was a very high level of understanding that the climate emergency was extremely serious, and a very high appetite for really quite radical, bold policies. And this came out during the pandemic, and I've been trying to put it under the noses of as many of the cabinet members and senior officers in the council as possible to show them that they do have this mandate. And the other part of my oh yeah, and also Climate Outreach, formerly known as COIN, have done a load of research at a national level that shows both that there is appetite and how you can induce appetite for radical policies by how you communicate to ordinary people that don't know or care as much about climate change yet. The other part of my answer, which I suspect all three of us are going to agree on, is citizens' assemblies. Now, obviously, I'm an elected councillor. I believe that elections and party politics is part of the solution, but it's not all of the solution. And I think citizens' assemblies are a really powerful way of bringing people with you. And in Bristol, we've managed a combination of that, in that Green councillors on the council put forward a motion which has been accepted, and that was about 6 months ago, and the Citizens' Assembly in Bristol is now underway. It's already had its first meeting. Its second meeting has either just happened or it's just about to happen, and that is on climate and recovery from the pandemic considered all together, which I think it has to be. And I'm really excited to see the results of that. So yeah, there we go. There's my 2 pence worth.
Thanks, Carla. Sarah?
I think Rebecca Wills from Lancaster University was really interesting on this, and she did an article, I think it was in the Guardian about a year and a half ago, and she went and talked to a load of MPs, and it ended up in one of those really irritating circular arguments of MPs don't want to be seen as a single issue. They don't want to be seen as radicals. They don't want to be seen as extremists, and they worry that if they actually demand the action that they know is required to address our collapsing wildlife and to protect us from runaway climate change, that they will be viewed like that and not taken seriously. And they're not pushed by their constituents to do it. Their constituents, you think, oh, you think there's a bit of a problem going on. You look to see what those in power who are legislating to act to protect national security, and none of them are really talking about this, and none of them are laying out, just how extreme the risk is that we face. And so, for example, there's been a bit of work done by Exeter University indicating that we lose the ice caps. We lose what's called the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Current, and there is a possibility that we no longer have arable agriculture in the United Kingdom. Like that is a risk that we are currently facing, the loss of arable agriculture, and yet our politicians prevaricate and talk about what is credible and what is possible. So they're not acting. Because they're not acting, the general public think there's probably not a problem. Because the general public aren't pushing the politicians, they won't act. And I think what Extinction Rebellion have done so well is to say there is a really serious problem here, and it is so extreme. I am not going to move when you ask me, policeman. I am not going to behave in court. I'm not going to do these things because the risk is so great that I'm going to step outside of the social norm. I'm going to find the courage to do it. And I think that they've broken that logjam, and our politicians are beginning to grapple with this issue.
Thanks, Sarah. Laura, did you have a comment on that?
Yeah, well, it just highlights again what I was saying, the need for truth telling and for new voices to step up and be heard and to tell those truths. It can't just be a teenage girl and Extinction Rebellion that are speaking the truths, and the media have done as good a job as they can to discredit the messengers, distracting from those important messages. And so it needs new voices to come and step forward and say what's actually happening out there to people realise. And then just to add to what Sarah and Carla have said with citizens' assemblies, people's assemblies, the power of active listening, just hearing people out, hearing what their thoughts and beliefs are. Once they've said it, they're much more willing to take on new information. And if they're part of the decision-making process, then they're going to be more likely to consent to the changes that are necessary. And Dale Vince has done an amazing job from Ecotricity this week of a 5-day campaign in the Express, the Green Britain Revolution, things we need to change the way we live to avoid climate crisis, to build a green economy and have all the jobs and benefits that go with that. The main areas being energy, transport and food. I haven't actually read it, but I'm really keen to. And then the Sun have jumped straight onto it too and had to do something similar. So, you know, I think that the awareness is of the climate crisis is not going to be an issue for too much longer. It's more to be what are we going to do about it.
Great, thanks. I think you're right. You know, reaching out into those new audiences is really important, like through the campaign with the Express. And even if you might not agree with everything the Express runs on a usual day, and that often their stories actually contradict the campaign, I think it's important to reach out, like you say, and engage with new audiences and look at those new people. Another thing for me on that point is that climate justice comes with social justice. We have to make sure that people can feed their children and clothe their children and you know, manage their mental and physical health at the same time as focusing on climate justice, because you know, the two are hand in hand, and that's why obviously the Green Party has fantastic policies on both of those areas. Okay, next question. Mick D, I think that this is a interesting question. It was at 8:11 in case I haven't, there's 39 new messages I need to look at, so so I'll be scrolling, but Mick, if you've got if you can unmute and ask your question.
Okay, yeah, hi, thanks. Now, which question was it? I put two on there, really. One of them was about, it's about now the scientists are gods, really, at the moment. They are saving us, unlike the normal people. It's normally the Americans that save us from world catastrophe, but it's the scientists this time. So are we going to capitalise on that and somehow get that transfer from people's brains and say, look, you know, you believe the scientists, you're relying on them, and they're telling us this is a complete disaster. So you have to get your head around that now. And that was one aspect I thought would be an interesting sort of way of approaching it. But that's more a tactical approach, really. If you're an Extinction Rebellion person or something, you might decide to go down that route. But the other thing was to do with the front line, as I see it, on planning. It's a nightmare. At the council, if it was a real meeting, we'd have the ability to protest because it was a physical meeting. You could stand up and could disrupt it. You can't do anything online, and it's just painful to watch the business as usual going on. So well, because I know my own town, like you would know your own town, and when they even my own council who's declared a climate emergency, wanting to build on a beautiful piece of land full of wildlife and mature trees. You just think, I can't believe it. And even, you know, it's just heartbreaking. And at all sorts of levels, it's happening in reality. And, you know, and you can't build a housing estate without using a lot of carbon. Even if you're building brilliant, you know, houses that won't emit any carbon, and it's quite hard to do that, into the future, just the act of doing it is just very carbon intensive. And this is what's going on. And then nothing's stopping. And I think there's almost a bit of a surge to get in there quick before things change. It's anyway, I don't want to depress people. I'm just more aware of it because I'm a councillor. I'd be blissfully unaware I'd be able to enjoy myself as a citizen if I hadn't joined the Green Party, joined the Extinction Rebellion. It's all your fault. I could ignore it and fly around the world. Sorry, I'm getting off track now, but yeah, I think those are the points I was making.
Okay, great.
It's been a brilliant discussion.
Thanks, Mick. So how do we maximise on the role of the scientist and how do we hold our councils to account when they've declared climate emergencies and yet they're letting these things pass under their noses? Okay, so who wants to come in first? Laura, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, mine was just on the last bit of, that's a perfect example of an excellent Greens can action for a Green councillor to get involved in locally to protect that bit of land and those trees and to gain support from the local community. Obviously we can't get out at the moment, so it's going to be petitions, but creating a campaign around local actions is a brilliant way to get people mobilising, and hopefully then when it's time they can all spring to life and descend upon Westminster dressed in green.
Absolutely. Carla?
Yeah, I share your frustration, Mick, with the planning system. That's been really one of the things I've been bashing up against in the last 2 and a bit years since our climate emergency passed, because changing planning policies at a local and a national level is just such a painfully slow process. So Bristol was due to have updated its local plan by now, and many environmental organisations plus the 11 Green Party councillors here lobbied very heavily, and well, I say lobbied, like we were on the working group, to have zero carbon homes as a requirement, and that made it into the draft, and then we got stuck in the queue behind the regional plan, which got turned back by the Secretary of State. And there's literally nothing that our council could do. Even if the Greens were running the council, we would just have to sit and wait for that one to be sorted out before our one can be passed. And it's been enormously frustrating. I've sat on a planning committee for most of my time as a councillor, apart from the last 9 months or so. And yeah, as you say, new planning applications are being submitted now that are only meeting the Bristol's existing policy, which is for developments to reduce 20% of their carbon emissions by efficiency or solar panels or whatever. And no amount of me saying, look, I know that's technically the policy, but Bristol has also declared a climate emergency and has a draft local plan that says 100%, which is going to be adopted imminently. And these buildings are going to be here for the next 50 years. So please, can we just like even split the difference and do like 60 or something? But yeah, unfortunately, that is one of the very frustrating things about local government, that balances out the occasional moments of joy when you get a success through. And I have not yet found what the solution is to that.
I'm not alone.
Sarah, any comments on that?
Well, you know, I spent 8 years at the county council and on the district council before that, so I feel your pain, Mick. However, I do think if I was a councillor now, that I would actually view my roles slightly differently, and I would actually attempt to use my platform to highlight the bigger issue that we're facing. So we are about to crash through 1.5 degrees, right? Quite possibly that's going to happen by 2025. Kevin Anderson has written various articles saying goodbye Paris, Professor Kevin Anderson of the Tyndale Centre, because he doesn't think it's possible anymore to stay below 1.5 degrees. And so if you actually look at that framing, then what's the point of the local plan and unless it's that huge reframing that's required of your council, so that everything is viewed through either through the climate or the biodiversity crisis, and that's what you actually need to seek to achieve. So influence in the individual planning acts. I think, you know, the extreme weather events we are about to face in the next 10, 20, 30 years, most of the infrastructure we have in this country is not going to be up to the task, you know. So it's a very different world that awaits us, and I think it's probably worth remembering that when you're faced with the minutiae of the individual bureaucracy, and to use the platform you have, because you do have one as a local councillor. What you do makes the news. And so it's like letting go of what used to be a good councillor, a good Green councillor, and reframing it in terms of a rebellion and a transformation.
Good. That's really good to hear. I also think we need civic disobedience as opposed to civil disobedience.
Yes.
If, for instance, the whole of the planning committee said, "I'm sorry, but we're just walking out now. Oh dear, my computer stopped working. I can't attend." You know, we just need something like that, and I'm praying for a miracle. Thanks for your answers.
Thanks, Mick. You know, man-made miracles are definitely possible as well. So let's all start thinking about what we can do. I'm going to ask Kath Child now. Got an interesting question. I think it was at 8:29. Kath, if you've asked multiple questions, I'm still catching up. There's lots of conversation going on, which is fantastic. Please keep chatting. Kath, are you there?
I just wanted to ask, because I sit on a daily basis with businesses talking about climate change and what we can do, understanding our impact, reducing our impact. And I just wanted to hear what your thoughts are about mobilizing businesses in this effort. And I know there's lots of things happening in Bristol. We also have an office where I'm working in Bristol. So I'm curious to hear what your thoughts around this business declares, B Corp had the climate collective, but there's other initiatives as well. You already mentioned Ecotricity. So yeah, that's basically my thoughts.
Thanks, Kath. Thanks. Okay, Sarah.
Yeah, I think you should be making your voice heard with our local MPs. And that you should be relentlessly getting in touch with them, demanding action to protect the future of your businesses, because that's what you're talking about. So, in the way that almost, I can't think of many businesses which have been untouched by COVID, and there is growing evidence that COVID is basically a symptom of the environmental collapse. So, and this is. We are like we have more extreme weather events. We are going to have another RNA pandemic. That seems beyond doubt. Another one is going to come, and the next one might not spare our children. Like this one was amazing. You know that the very, very young appear to be protected from this particular pandemic. That's not the way that it usually plays out, and we might not be so lucky next time. So as our environment breaks down, we are going to face more and more of these shocks. And so the action that is required to protect your business and your future is what our elected representatives should be doing. And Parliament does have the power to change. What it would look like if a unilateral government decided to act on carbon would be super interesting. It's like in the at the start of the 20th century, when countries were declaring themselves as communists. You know, it was really a really amazing transition that happened there, and it's going to be something similar. So what it looks like is super interesting, but the business community, especially by the Conservative government, is listened to. I know Boris Johnson said "fuck business," but you know that's not actually entirely true. So using your voice with our elected representatives, with things like G1st, with Mark Hawthorne, like getting together in groups and petitioning them, I think is a really powerful and valuable thing to do, as well as in practice seeking to be sustainable.
Thanks, Sarah. Carla?
Out of interest, Kath, who is the we that you said that also has an office in Bristol?
Work for a healthcare company called In Vivo Healthcare.
I'll check them out. Yeah, I agree with what Sarah said, that businesses approaching MPs and explaining that they've got the appetite for radical change, because I think a lot of politicians think or assume that the businesses are going to resist radical change, when increasingly that's not necessarily the case. And so businesses have more power than we do to persuade, yes, the Conservative government, but frankly also most Labour MPs, that this is an acceptable and palatable thing for them to be championing. So, for example, on the CEE bill, which I was expecting to talk about more than we have this evening, I've been using, and we were talking about in the last question as well about councillors using their platform to speak out from, not just dealing with things on the council. So one of the things I've been doing is using my platform as a councillor to lobby the 4 Bristol MPs, all of whom are Labour, about the CEE bill, the Climate and Ecological Emergency Bill. And so far, one of them said, no, I won't support it for about 4 or 5 months, and then changed his mind and said he would, but the other 3 are still saying no. And I think they're saying no, well, they're giving reasons about how it's a private member's bill and therefore it won't make any difference. But the Climate Change Act started as a private member's bill as well, which just goes to show that if people are determined to make it happen, it'll happen. But MPs need to hear from the side that they think are against, that they're not.
Thanks, Carla. Laura, did you have anything to say on that?
No, I realise we're short on time. Do you want to move to the next question?
Okay, yeah, absolutely. So I'll do one more question and then I'll have sort of a short last minute thoughts, comments from our presenters before we finish. So David Bullock, I know that that's quite a paragraph that you've written, but maybe if you could ask the question, that would be great. At 8:48 it was.
Hi, my question was really a comment about science and uncertainty. It's really good that we pin our data on science. Trouble is that science is inherently uncertain. That is part of the scientific process, uncertainty and probability. So we need really effective communicators, but more than that, we also need people who are prepared to make judgments and stand by those judgments. And that really comes down to us and to local influencers and politicians. And I'm a scientist myself, but I accept that science needs to inform. I don't think it's going to be practical to have science leaders. So when it comes to the COP, we also need to have compassion in there. We also need to have judgments. We also need to have feelings and things which are non-scientific in order to get messages across effectively.
Absolutely, great point. Anyone like to come in on that first?
I think David's right. It's super difficult to understand not just the climate science, but also the unraveling of the natural world. Like what exactly is the impact of neonicotinoids? Well, you know, why is it so terrible if we lose a couple of species of insects? And it's you can't say this is going to happen. You know, we can't say that there is going to be civil collapse if we increase global temperatures by 3 degrees. It's all a matter of risk, you know, and it's inherently difficult for us as human beings to judge risk. So the current Committee on Climate Change is their plan to get to 2050, net zero by 2050. That gives us a better than 50% chance of staying below 1.5. So that's a toss of a coin. So that's the plan for the United Kingdom. Is we're going to go, well, in fact, the world is we're going to go for a toss of a coin. Those are the odds that our government is prepared to take. So that the inherent uncertainty, one of the science, because it's a range of predictions, and two, how we as a complex civilization are going to react to the unfolding events. We don't know what's going to happen. All we do know is that we have left the stable Holocene and that we are in a period of mass extinction. We're in a mass extinction event. We know those two things have happened. We know that our common future is rapid change. That's what we face. So the only certainty is currently uncertainty, and it's a really tough message to take forward. And I don't know that any of us have got it right yet. And it's really hard for politicians who want to stand up and say, you know, this is what I will do and this is what I will achieve, when in all honesty, we cannot say that. You know, we can say decarbonise as rapidly as possible for the best chance that we don't fuck everything up. That's about it, right? So, and it's not the best message to sell.
Thanks, Sarah. An honest one though, even if maybe not the easiest. Okay, Laura, would you like to come in on that?
Just very briefly to just chip in about the precautionary principle. And when there's a percentage risk of something happening, then you take the precautionary approach. You know, you don't risk your child's life to enable you to continue your life as it is. And we've really got to change the rhetoric from, you know, there's an emergency, there's a problem, to really selling people the solutions now and getting them to buy into it. People can't imagine what it is that they're going to have to, how it is that they're going to have to live, making the changes. They think we want them all to go back to the caveman times, but in reality we're kind of all stuck in our man-made caves at the moment because of an ecological crisis. So yeah, engaging in the precautionary principle, and I got disrupted by my kids, so my flow's gone. I'm sorry, I shall pass back.
Don't worry at all. Thanks. Carla, would you like to come in on that?
Nothing to add, really. I agree.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I think it's a really interesting point. I mean, scientists have been saying these things for how many years, and yet it is about now storytellers, creating that story that people can connect with. George Monbiot does a fantastic podcast that I will try and find a link to share with you, that talks about the fact that we haven't yet got that story right for people to engage properly with it, but hopefully we will, as more and more communicators get on board with the science. Okay, so we're 5 minutes before closing time. If I could just ask all of our speakers to do sort of a 1 minute final roundup, whether it's a rebel rousing call to action or a summary of what you've said, or some key points that you want us to take away from this, and just say thank you so much for taking the time to join us and present. And I will call on Carla first. Thanks,
Thank
Carla.
you. I'm going to use this opportunity to answer the question that I think is at the heart of this evening's discussion, of how can we make sure that we see climate action and climate justice this year in 2021. This is all of our top priorities. I'm sure you wouldn't be here. And there are a few different ways to pursue it. I share my fellow panelists' frustration with the slow pace of change. It brings me to tears, really. And I don't think that electoral politics is the whole answer by any means. I want to see nonviolent direct action. I want us to see us pulling every lever possible, because we don't have the luxury of choosing between them. We have to do everything. But I think that what I am best positioned to do, and to be honest, what the Green Party is best positioned to do, is use electoral politics as our main tool for change. So my big focus for the next few months is going to be getting elected, and I see that, or re-elected, and I see that as explicitly a climate goal, because I do think there's a tendency in the Green Party sometimes to see electoral campaigning and climate campaigning as separate, or even as odds with one another, but I don't think that's the case. If I was not an elected Green councillor in 2018, I wouldn't have been able to propose that climate emergency motion that started the tidal wave of declarations across Europe. And I do not believe that that would have happened by us lobbying or campaigning or doing nonviolent direct action from outside the council to politicians from other parties. I wouldn't have been able to use my seat to achieve the other big changes we've achieved in Bristol, getting the university to completely withdraw millions of pounds from fossil fuels, my colleague Paula getting Bristol to do a citizens' assembly. And I wouldn't have had the public platform that I had to get national press coverage while promoting green policies, like, well, loads, but a recent one is the Green Party policy on an advertising ban for polluting products. We got national media coverage for that. We wouldn't have got that if we weren't involved in the electoral system. So with the elections this May in Bristol and across a lot of the UK, that's going to be my focus for the next few months. And then after that, it's all eyes on COP.
Thanks, Carla. Fantastic. Okay, Sarah.
I'd like to encourage everybody who hasn't to go to the ceebill.uk website and sign up as a supporter and write to your MP, whoever they are, and don't stop. Just keep writing. And as Carla said, you know, eventually the one MP in Bristol changed his mind, and they will change their mind. And we as civil society, this is the only route we have through a private members bill to impacting on legislation before the House of Commons. It's not the only route. It needs a non-violent direct action to take place to open that space up for the CEE bill to seem like the reasonable answer. So it's an ecology of change that we need. And I'd also like to take just a little moment to recognise basically what a strange and monumental hand we've been dealt by fate, really, to be the generation of people at this moment of crisis. And, you know, if we survive, if we win, the history books will remember us, right? And if we don't succeed, then there may not be any history books. So it really is a most amazing point that we're alive at.
Thanks, Sarah. Real goosebump moment there for me. Okay, Laura, you're up.
Yeah, just quickly then, if you're feeling enthused and empowered and want to get involved in NVDA in any particular way, people's assemblies, sign up to Greens Can on the website, come along to the training. If you want to get more involved with actually making things happen within the movement, then the email address is there. Please do get in touch and let's write something that's going to be in those history books for our kids to read back and remember on. Thank you ever so much, everybody. Thank you, Jenny, Carla,
Thanks,
Sarah.
Laura. Thank you. Thanks so much. Thank you so much to our three speakers for taking the time out to come and talk to us. Thank you to everybody who has joined the session tonight and continues to be a part of the Cloud Cafe community. We really appreciate you engaging with us. This session has been recorded and will be up on our YouTube channel tomorrow. So go on there, like it, share it, rewatch it, send it to your friends. I've just shared the link in the chat to the YouTube channel. So, you know, whatever revolutionary change looks like to you, go and do it. You know, vote, be a councillor, join a climate action network, join XR. You know, I think it's whatever it looks like to you is important, and we can't all do everything, but I think we can absolutely try to do something new in 2021 and see if that makes a difference to ourselves and our families and our communities. So thanks again for joining. We've managed to do it by 9 o'clock on time. Really appreciate the speakers taking the time, like I say. And if everyone wants to put their cameras back on, we usually like to see everybody's smiling faces at the end of the session. Thanks to all our newbies and our regular customers. We really appreciate you coming along. So hopefully we'll see you for the March session, which is on the US election. Another fantastic Cloud Cafe, no doubt. Thanks again, as always, to the organisers, Elizabeth, Dagan, Lynn, and the rest of the team. Have a lovely evening, and we'll see you again soon.